I overheard my daughter say I'd soon disappear. What I did next transformed her life forever. Jake was halfway through cleaning the dishes when he caught the sound of Emily's voice drifting from her room. He paused, leaning against the sink, sudsy water drenching the sleeves of his worn flannel. "I don't want him to just fade away," she said, her voice tremulous with an emotion Jake couldn't put his finger on. It felt like a punch in the gut. Perched between work and bills for years, he finally understood the chasm that had grown between him and his only child. A chasm of silence that, mixed with the fatigue of overlong shifts at the factory, had come to shape their lives. The words echoed in his mind, each reverberation drawing his heart down a darker path. How had he let himself slip into the shadows of her life? The truth clawed at him. His dreams of crafting fine furniture seemed like echoes from a forgotten past. He'd put them aside long ago, buried under years of worrying about rent and groceries and the fear of not making ends meet. Yet in that moment, something sparked. Memories of his father's workshop flooded back. The smell of fresh-cut wood, the satisfaction of shaping something with his hands. What if the way to heal their relationship was hidden in those dreams he had locked away? Summoning courage, Jake resolved to turn the dusty garage into a workshop. He could feel the sense of purpose swell within him as he grabbed the handle of the old garage door. Emotions wrestled in his chest. Would Emily want to join him? Would she find joy in it? Or had he already lost her too deeply? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Time rushed forward as he transformed the cluttered space, cutting and sanding. With each movement, he felt like a man reclaiming lost fragments of himself. When he invited Emily to join him, her initial hesitation melted as they began to breathe life into empty space. Laughter echoed among the wood shavings and tools, and they shared dreams, his voice hesitating with pride while she offered sweet visions of future successes. But a distant storm loomed on the horizon. It crashed into their growing bond when a classmate's cruel words reached Emily. A factory worker could never inspire sophistication or artistic ambition. The pain in her eyes confirmed his greatest fear. Her budding insecurities mirrored her own self-doubt. Would he eclipse him, or had he dimmed her light completely? Jake noticed the slight curl of her shoulders, the way her laughter faded, until silence settled over their crafting. Determined, he doubled down, striving to create a centerpiece for the upcoming community art show that might convince her, even if just a little, that their bond was stronger than whispered taunts. But doubt gnawed at him, hollowing out his resolve. Could he channel his regrets and fears into something that would prove his love and value as a father? As the show drew nearer, chaotic tension wrapped around Jake like a vice. Would he bolster his daughter's shattered confidence, or would he simply reinforce the weight of unworthiness they both carried? Each stroke of sandpaper became an exercise not just in crafting, but in fighting against despair. What if this effort was futile? What if they were standing at the brink, one misstep away from crumbling? The stakes couldn't be higher, and he wrestled with the mounting dread. Could he truly change how Emily saw him before the art show darkened their door? With the art show looming on the horizon, Jake's determination transformed him into a man almost unrecognizable from the one who had once been buried under the weight of relentless routine. He lingered over each cut, each adhered joint, pouring not just his craftsmanship, but his hopes and fears into their work. Yet, as the days progressed, he felt the growing pressure of expectation, a ticking clock counting down their chances to make a meaningful statement. The centerpiece took shape, a sturdy, elegant table that embodied resilience. Each swipe with the plane carved more than wood. It fashioned Jake's desire to connect with Emily, to anchor her in strength rather than insecurity. But with each passing day, the specter of doubt loomed larger, eclipsing moments of joy in the workshop with shrouded worries. Maybe it isn't enough, he mumbled to himself, his hands trembling slightly as he sanded the edges one evening. The unfamiliar texture of uncertainty gnawed at him. Would this piece truly reflect their journey, or would it merely highlight the vast divides they both feared too much to cross? As his late nights in the workshop bled into exhaustion, Jake couldn't shake the shadows that whispered in the silence. The night before the art show, Jake found himself unable to sleep, plagued by uneasy thoughts that churned relentlessly within him. A moment of clarity struck as he stared into the garage's depths, the tools glinting in the dim light. He needed to tell Emily the truth about his ambitions, his fears, and how deeply he needed her presence in his life. The next day, he nervously approached Emily as she organized her belongings to prepare for the show. The sight of her silhouetted against the brightening light filled him with warmth, yet resolve was still hard to grasp. "Can we talk for a minute?" he asked, his voice slightly cracking. She turned, her face cautious but curious. "Yeah, Dad, what's up?" Jake hesitated.
This wasn't just any conversation. It was a lifeline. I know that things have been a bit off recently, and I can feel how my journey in the factory has affected you. I want to do better. I want this table to mean something more than just a project. Emily's expression shifted, a raw vulnerability shimmering beneath her composed exterior. "Do you think it can be enough?" she asked, her voice almost breaking. The question dug deep, and Jake felt the icy grip of vulnerability sink into his chest. "I want it to be. I want you to see, not just the table, but your strength. You are more than your classmates' words. You deserve to shine, and I don't want to disappear from your life." For a moment, the world stilled. Emily's eyes searched his, and Jake's heart raced, vulnerable and exposed. This was it, the tender moment that could either mend their fractures or break them further apart. "Dad," she breathed, her gaze intense, "I want to believe that too, but how can we know if I can really be enough?" As they stood in the charged silence, Jake's mind raced. He knew their conversation was only the beginning. It had to lead them somewhere more hopeful, to a space where the past wouldn't dictate their future. The worry dissipated as determination filled the air between them. "You're more than enough, and together we can keep proving that." With the sun setting, casting warm hues across their creation, Jake felt a realization dawning. This journey didn't end with the show. It was just the beginning. The challenge lay ahead, and he knew they would face it together. But as they exchanged tentative smiles, a new worry formed in the back of Jake's mind. The art show was merely a platform. Would they truly be ready for the judgment ahead? Would the world recognize both their struggles and their triumphs? Determination surged through him, but clarity was still elusive. The true measure of their journey was not just showcasing talent, but confronting what awaited them outside the garage. The echoes from their poignant conversation lingered in Jake's mind as the day of the art show approached. Despite the weight of doubt still clinging to him, he stirred with purpose, determined to create more than a piece of decor. He wanted to forge a symbol of their connection. Yet the anxiety was palpable, like a storm gathering behind the horizon. Would their all-or-nothing endeavor resonate with others, or would it crumble, revealing the fissures beneath? On the morning of the show, determination wrestled with dread as he assembled the centerpiece. The beauty of the wood, the careful design, they felt like glimpses into a soul laid bare. With each adjustment, he pondered how to convey his most profound desires to Emily. After all, this wasn't merely a showcase. It was a declaration of hope for both of them. As they headed towards the venue, a wave of nostalgia washed over him. He recalled his younger self, a boy with dreams, shadowed by notions of inadequacy. How had he drifted into a mundane existence? Embracing woodwork had ignited a spark within him, but the path had always felt precarious. He needed this moment to embody a leap forward, not just for himself, but for Emily too. The venue was abuzz with frenetic energy, colorful banners flapping in the wind, art strewn across walls like the hopes and dreams of many souls. It was intimidating yet invigorating. He could feel Emily's nervousness magnified by the cacophony surrounding them. Their eyes caught each other's, sharing a silent bond amplified by the shared uncertainty hanging in the air. "Are you ready?" Jake asked, adjusting the collar of his shirt out of habit rather than need. It was a futile attempt to disguise the anxiety blooming within. Emily nodded, but her gaze drifted, as if searching for it, something that could anchor her in the chaos. "I guess," she murmured, her words laced with unspoken fears. Jake swallowed hard, grasping her shoulder gently. "Listen, no matter what happens today, remember that this journey, it's ours. The art, the conversations, they all matter because they're born from us. We'll take this step together. She met his eyes then, and in that silent exchange, a moment of understanding sparked. As the presentations commenced, Jake felt the tension ripple through his body. He reflected on how far they had come, each piece a manifestation of their personal struggles and triumphs. How had art become the thread stitching their lives together? Standing beside Emily, he realized he wanted to share their story through this work, not let the world judge it devoid of context. When it came time for the centerpiece to be unveiled, a hush fell over the crowd. Jake could feel the gravity of expectations. He took a deep breath, bracing himself. Unveiling the table felt like revealing their hearts, their history, fears, triumphs, all laid bare for judgment. As murmurs of awe filtered through the crowd, he caught sight of Emily's reaction, her eyes wide with an emotion I could not place. Relief washed over him briefly. Perhaps they would be understood. But as the applause echoed, jolting him from his reverie, a sense of impending dread took root once more. The spotlight, which had briefly felt warm, was now excruciatingly hot, scrutinizing every detail. And then, amidst the thrumming energy of the room, an unexpected voice broke through the applause. This piece, it doesn't reflect what we see in those who struggle. It seems inauthentic. The words hung in the air, piercing the moment of triumph. Jake's heart plummeted as the room shifted, whispers turning into a subtle storm of skepticism. His mind raced. How could he defend what he and Emily had poured into their work? Would they find the strength to stand against the scrutiny? Would this moment tear apart the fragile connection they had fought to forge?
As the crowd's expression shifted, Jake found himself facing not just public judgment, but the deeper uncertainty within him. Could he confront this critique without crumbling? The atmosphere sizzled with tension, leaving him at the brink of an existential confrontation. Would they fall apart under scrutiny, or could they rally to redefine the narrative together? The moment of truth had truly arrived. The moment hung in the air like a heavy curtain, suffocating Jake. The criticism was a knife twisting in the fabric of their creations, and he struggled against the rising tide of panic that threatened to pull him under. Thoughts raced through his mind, each one more chaotic than the last. What if this was the end? Emily's discomfort was palpable, a stark contrast to the applause that still echoed from the crowd, tinged with doubt. It was as if the warmth of camaraderie had become a chilling confrontation. Jake felt the urge to defend themselves, to shout against the accusations, but he paused, realizing that a reaction founded in anger would signify defeat. "Let's talk to him," he whispered to Emily, gesturing subtly toward the voice that had cast doubt over their work. He wasn't sure how she would respond, but the fire of determination ignited within him. "What? Now?" Emily's brow furrowed with concern, uncertainty flashing in her eyes. "Yes," Jake insisted, feeling a shift in the air. "We're not defined by his opinion. We can open a dialogue. Maybe he sees something we can learn from." With an unsteady breath, they pushed through the crowd toward the critic, a bearded man whose stern features reflected a heart hardened by experience. As they approached, Jake's chest tightened. It was one thing to confront a stranger's tainted view. It was another entirely to expose the vulnerability they tried so desperately to depict. "Excuse me," Jake started, voice steady, although he was anything but. "I'm Jake, and this is Emily. We heard your thoughts on our piece. Can you elaborate on what seemed inauthentic?" The man raised an eyebrow, considering him. Jake held his ground, the tension splintering his initial apprehension and morphing into an unfurling courage. Understanding was the goal now, a bridge they both needed to cross to validate their journey. "It lacks depth," the critic replied, hands resting firmly in his pockets. "Art is an outcry, a raw expression of pain, and it doesn't touch the reality of struggle. The materials are beautiful, but the narrative feels superficial." At that moment, Jake felt the words echo inside him, becoming a tangible reality. It was true. They were not just wood and craft. They were emotion, struggle, connection. He was struck by his own previous hesitation, a realization dawning that their original vision might not have been as clear as they had believed. Emily chimed in, her voice gaining strength. "What if we told our story together?"
The journey of us making this piece was filled with vulnerability and frustration. It was about our navigation through struggles, the way we lifted each other up. We don't want just admiration. We want genuine connection. The critic studied them, surprise flickering in his eyes. For the first time, Jake sensed possibility in the air. If they could articulate their collective struggle, they could rebuild the narrative that had momentarily cracked. "Then, show me," he said slowly, the challenge turning the heated moment into a shared quest for understanding. "Not in words, but in experience. Art reflects life, and yours needs to extend beyond just this piece. Dive into the rawness." Jake's heart raced. A new direction unfurled before him. He realized this criticism had not only stripped away their assumptions, but also opened a path toward growth, both within their art and as individuals. Jake exchanged glances with Emily, a supportive understanding passing between them. What felt like an obstacle now seemed like an invitation to transform. Inwardly, Jake plotted their next steps. There was so much to express, but how could they encapsulate their journey in a way that resonated with authenticity? This moment served as a fierce catalyst, igniting an urgency within him. Conversations needed to happen. Friends, family, the experiences they had shared had to be woven into their art. As Jake stepped back to glance at the centerpiece, a vision crystallized. They would create not just a sculpture, but a narrative journey. They could not allow this critique to defeat them. Instead, it could symbolize a pivotal point in their shared evolution. "Let's do it," he murmured to Emily, resolve tightening around him. "We'll break the mold, and in doing so, break ourselves open too." As they prepared to navigate this new artistic frontier, questions began to swirl in Jake's mind. What else lurked in the shadows of their deepest fears, waiting to be unveiled? Would reclaiming their narrative strengthen their bond, or reveal more fractures? With every uncertain step toward reconceiving their creation, he felt a new energy coursing through him, a desire to explore the authenticity that would ultimately lead to their rebirth. But even as he formed plans, another voice echoed in his thoughts. Could they truly pour their wounds and truths into art? Would their vulnerability lead to healing, or lay bare vulnerabilities they weren't ready to confront? The answers were waiting just beyond reach, tantalizingly close. The crisp air outside the gallery felt like a breath of fresh perspective for Jake as he stepped away from the scene of conflict. The critical voice had left a mark, but rather than allowing it to fester, Jake felt a determination swell within him. He turned to Emily, her expression a mixture of fear and excitement, mirroring his own disarray, but flickering with potential.
"We need to start gathering our stories," he said, the words spilling forth with newfound urgency. "We've shared struggles that shaped us, but what if we documented them, blended our experiences with the art? It could add the depth he's looking for." Emily blinked, the spark of his idea igniting a kindling in her eyes. "Do you think we can really do that? I mean, expose ourselves like that?" "It's the only way," Jake replied, searching for the conviction to press on. "We can't shy away from our vulnerabilities. That's where the real connection lies. We have to be willing to dive deep, even if it scares us." He imagined people finding their own truths in their creation. He envisioned the connection it could build. But how far could they take that journey? Inwardly, he struggled with revealing parts of himself he had long buried. The childhood memories of feeling insufficient, the deep-seated fears of failure, these were the vulnerabilities he had tried to sculpt into strength, yet now they beckoned to be expressed. A journey needs direction, he thought aloud, his mind racing. We should interview our friends and family, capture their insights about us, even the aspects they think we might not want to acknowledge. It'll ground our art in more than just our fears. It'll transform it into a shared experience. Emily nodded, her own courage building in response. "Let's start with my mom. She always had a knack for raw honesty. If we can face her perspective, what emerges from that might help us." Before she could finish her thought, Jake's determination swelled again. "Yes, we'll talk to her. That might just unlock the deeper narratives we're trying to shape." They made plans that day, filled with hesitant excitement. Each conversation was not just a step toward clarity in their art. It became a potential revelation of Jake's own fears, a way to confront the lingering voice of doubt that threatened his spirit. As the week unfolded, they gathered their stories like pieces of a puzzle, each revealing a vulnerability they previously clung to in silence. Jake learned that his desire for validation stemmed from a childhood perception that he had to prove his worth. As he listened, he found echoes of his own struggles in every story shared. Emily's mother spoke of profound fears and life's uncertainties too, and in those moments, he saw reflections of their imperfections that could metamorphose into strength. But with each revelation came a growing discomfort. Jake began to recognize that his past wasn't merely a backdrop for their art.
It was a living thing, filled with judgments and experiences that demanded acknowledgement. How do we express this without becoming too self-indulgent? He questioned inwardly, a barrier looming between potential transformation and fear of oversharing. This raw material, these conversations, held an enigmatic power, and the weight of their authenticity coursed through Jake's veins.
But he feared that each element might lay bare tender parts of him he wasn't ready to confront. As they sat down to create that weekend, Jake felt waves of doubt crash against his resolve. What if the deeper they delved, the more fractured they found themselves? It was clear he was faced with dualities, the need for expression and the panic of exposure. But he steeled himself. "No more backing away," he murmured. "We move forward, regardless." Just as he reached for the tools that would help them shape their vision, ideas scribbled in notepads, sketches inspired by their conversations, his phone buzzed incessantly, breaking the focus in his mind. A text from an old mentor read, "We need to talk." The knot in Jake's stomach tightened again. What could that mean, he wondered, torn between the urgency of their artistic endeavor and the encroaching shadows of his past, which seemed determined to entwine themselves into the present in a way he could not ignore. The moment of truth was upon him. He would have to confront not just the critique that had driven him forward, but the very parts of himself that wanted to remain hidden. What awaited him in that conversation? Would it offer the insight he desperately sought, or plunge him deeper into conflict? A swirling uncertainty lingered as he prepared for the next step of his journey, a step that could either tether him to the past or ignite a transformative flame within. Jake stared at his phone, the text buzzing like an alarm in his hand. The words from his mentor reverberated in his mind. "We need to talk." He felt the weight of expectations pressing down, a tangible reminder of unresolved discussions and unresolved fears. His mentor had been one of the few constants in his life, guiding him through the tumultuous world of art and critique. Yet beneath that veneer of guidance lay a history filled with tension and unspoken discontent. With a hard swallow, Jake fought against the urge to ignore the message. How do I approach this? He thought, pacing the small room that now felt confining. The walls around him, plastered with sketches and unfinished pieces, seemed to mock his indecision. As the echoes of Emily's encouraging voice drifted back into his mind, he realized he had no choice but to confront this old specter. After a few moments of deliberation, he texted back, "When and where?" The swift response was nearly instantaneous. "Tomorrow at noon, the cafe on 5th. Setting the phone down, Jake took a deep breath, feeling the anxiety swell within him. What could this conversation reveal? Perhaps it was a chance for closure, or maybe it would bring forth new conflict. While grappling with a myriad of possibilities, the looming question remained, was he prepared to face the shadows of his past? That night was restless.
The doubts that had begun to creep in during his artistic process now surged like a tidal wave, reminding him of all the times he felt inadequate under the watchful eyes of critics. Each moment of insecurity was exacerbated by the weight of his history with his mentor, a man whose praise he had craved, yet who had also been the source of much of his self-doubt. As dawn broke, Jake found himself immersed in a brochure outlining techniques that had once inspired him, but instead of clarity, all he felt was frustration. "Nothing speaks to me today," he admitted to himself, recognizing the irony of seeking inspiration from something that felt distant. The heavy anticipation of the meeting pulled at him, a constant reminder that he was at a crossroads, and the direction he chose would shape not just his art, but his sense of self. Arriving at the cafe, Jake felt the chill of uncertainty in his bones. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, but it couldn't mask the apprehension building within. He spotted his mentor in a corner booth, a space that seemed both familiar and foreign. "Jake," his mentor greeted, with a firm handshake that felt deceptively warm. The conversation began innocuously, coffee swirling between them, but it quickly turned more serious. "You've been distant," his mentor noted, probing beneath the surface. "I can see it in your work. You're on the edge of something profound, yet something is holding you back. What is it?" The question hit Jake hard. The past moments with Emily and their shared stories echoed like a chorus in his mind. He needed to voice the fears that had shackled him. "I'm afraid of what my past means for my future," he confessed, the words flowing out before he could dissect their weight. His mentor nodded, eyes narrowing thoughtfully. "You can't allow fear to dictate your narrative, Jake. Every artist carries their history, but it's how you choose to transform that history that matters." A fresh wave of determination washed over him. The internal dialogue he had been grappling with shifted. It wasn't simply about validation anymore. It was about authenticity. The moments of vulnerability he and Emily had been documenting were gateways to understanding himself more profoundly than ever before. "Perhaps it's time to give voice to the parts of myself I've neglected," he said, almost as if speaking to himself. His mentor leaned forward, a spark back in his eyes. "You have the potential to create something impactful, but it requires courage. Are you ready to embrace the fullness of your story?" The words hung heavily between them, and Jake wondered if the fear of exposure was worth the potential of artistic rebirth. "What if I don't know how?" he questioned, vulnerability cracking through as he felt the familiar tightness in his chest. "You already do. You just need to trust yourself," the mentor replied with an edge of urgency. "Consider it an evolution, not just a crisis."
With that, an idea began to form, a narrative that could encapsulate not just the fears and failures, but the journey he was on with Emily. The clear, inviting horizon of possibility started to shine through his doubt. As they conversed deeper, Jake felt the boundaries of his limitations begin to stretch, like elastic snapping back to life. But even as hope surged, a shadow of uncertainty remained. What if he exposed too much? What if the raw truth he sought to reveal altered everything he had built? A text from Emily broke through the haze just as their discussion was concluding. It simply read, "Ready to dive deeper?" Jake looked back at his mentor, who offered an encouraging nod, and he felt a wave of resolve wash over him. It was time to confront not just the doubts, but everything. As he stepped out of the cafe, his phone buzzed again. This time it was an update about an old exhibition featuring previous works from artists he admired. What impact could this hold for him now that he was ready to embrace his truth? The question reverberated in his mind as he headed towards the unknown. Perhaps he was on the brink of discovering an answer that could define his path forward. A journey of turning his vulnerabilities into strengths could be a defining element of his next artistic endeavor. What would he unlock if he dared to enter fully into the creative unknown? Would confronting these truths illuminate pathways he hadn't considered? As Jake navigated the bustling streets toward the gallery, a mixture of excitement and trepidation brewed within him. The vibrant colors of street art and the lively chatter of passers-by created a stark contrast to his inner turmoil. This exhibition wasn't just about showcasing others' works. It was a mirror, reflecting his own journey, a tapestry of fears, aspirations, and potential breakthroughs. He arrived at the gallery, half expecting the chaotic energy to enhance his anxiety. Instead, it was the serene ambiance that caught him off guard. Pristine white walls adorned with eclectic pieces seemed to beckon him forward, urging him to explore. As he stepped inside, the hum of conversation faded slightly, and the bright lights bounced off artwork that had once seemed unattainable. Jake began his slow walk through the exhibits, each piece stirring a kind of resonance within. He scrutinized the artwork, pondering the artist's story behind each brushstroke, while recalling the conversations he had shared with Emily about vulnerability and authenticity. It was more than just a visual experience. It became a profound encounter with his own past and present, weaving threads of connection to his aspirations. A statue caught his eye, a sculpture writhing in anguish but ultimately arising in grace. It resonated deeply with him, representing the duality of his journey. It illuminated the struggle between his fears and the possibilities that lay ahead.
Jake realized this artwork echoed the themes he discussed with his mentor, confronting fear and embracing his narrative, no matter how complex. As he continued exploring, a sense of clarity began to emerge. Each piece prompted introspection, revealing hidden competencies he had described to his mentor but never fully acknowledged in himself. He felt a shift, a flicker of recognition of his own artistic voice that had been silenced for too long. This realization empowered him, a potent reminder that his narrative was not just filled with challenges, but with the potential for transformation. He paused before a canvas that depicted a chaotic storm dissipating into an idyllic sunrise. It echoed the internal storm he had faced: doubt, confusion, and fear, slowly finding its way toward clarity and purpose. Just then, a familiar figure approached him, breaking him from the reverie. It was Emily, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. "What do you think?" she asked, falling in step beside him. "It's incredible," he replied, the words feeling charged with newfound conviction. "It reflects so much of what I'm feeling lately." Emily nodded, her understanding gaze prompting him to share more. "I've been thinking about how much of myself I've held back, how I need to embrace my history and use it to shape my art," he confessed, the words flowing more freely now. She smiled encouragingly. "That's the first step. Art is about authenticity. It thrives in the space between vulnerability and courage. What do you plan to create next?" Jake hesitated for a moment, the weight of that question settling in. What could he create that would truly embody his transformation? And just like that, the storm inside him roared to life with possibilities. Maybe something that reflects both my shadows and my light. A series, perhaps. The idea sparked excitement in both of them, a beacon of collaboration igniting between them. Together, they discussed concepts and explored the way his personal journey could intertwine with the art they admired around them. By the time they reached the last exhibit, Jake felt as though he'd unearthed a rich vein of inspiration, one just waiting to be worked into something substantial. But amidst the hope, a lingering question gnawed at him. Would he be able to fully commit to this journey? Would he summon the courage to leave behind his fears and forge a new narrative? As they left the gallery, the sun began to set, casting a golden hue over the city. With renewed purpose, Jake resolved to begin this creative endeavor, but deeper reflections tugged at his heart. How much of his past was he willing to unveil? How much of his story needed to be told to truly find his voice? As they walked, a sudden message from his mentor popped up on his phone. "Remember, Jake, your story is your power. What's the first step you'll take toward sharing it?"
The question hung in the air, and he felt the weight of it again, a challenge, but also a promise of acceptance. Would he have the courage to shape this into his artistic truth? In that moment, a new layer of resolve emerged, crystallizing in his mind. What transformations awaited him if he truly embraced his journey? The thought lingered, igniting an urgency to act, to create, to dive beyond the safety of his known past into the uncertain depths of his emerging identity. Jake knew that the time had come to face the truth, both in his art and in his life, and he was ready to confront whatever awaited him in the unfolding chapters ahead. The moment Jake entered his studio the next day, the scent of paint and the familiar chaos of brushes scattered haphazardly across the table wrapped around him like a comforting cloak. This was his sanctuary, a place where his mind could untangle the knots of hesitation. Yet, instead of feeling at ease, an unexpected weight settled on his chest. He realized he was standing at the threshold of a monumental shift. What was he truly willing to expose in his art? His mentor's message replayed in his mind. Your story is your power. The words echoed with reverberations of truth and challenge. What if, instead of creating something beautiful that adhered to traditional notions of art, he unearthed the raw, unrefined pieces of himself? But that thought was perilous, teetering on the edge of fear and exhilaration. Would exposing his vulnerabilities attract understanding or judgment? With trembling hands, he began to set the scene for his new series. Using a blank canvas as an altar, he splashed colors without thinking, pouring out the muddied emotions swirling within him. Reds like anger, blues like betrayal, and yellows flickering with hope were resurrected in physical form. Each stroke became a confrontation, not just of his personal story, but the universal plight of hiding one's true self. However, the more he painted, the more doubts flooded his mind. His thoughts raced back to the conversations he had shared with Emily. What if I lay bare too much? What if others can't connect? He pressed the brush against the canvas harder, leaving visible marks of his struggle. He was wrestling with these fears, and yet yearning to press ahead. Hours drifted by as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting shadows across the studio. Jake felt the urge to reach out to Emily, but the dialogue felt too deep for texting. He hesitated, staring at his reflections in the surfaces of painted layers, each representing fragments of his essence. He realized he needed to articulate his thoughts, to see if the power of vulnerability could resonate beyond his isolated experience. Jake grabbed his phone, thumb hovering over Emily's contact.
He needed her insight, but first he had to accept the storm brewing inside him. Would she see him differently if he stretched beyond his previous limitations? Would he falter?
He pressed send, his message emerging as a quivering plea for guidance. I'm struggling to begin. I think I know what I want to say, but the fear of it not resonating paralyzes me. Can I trust that my story matters? 2 minutes later, his phone buzzed. Your story matters, Jake, but your fear doesn't define you. Spend this week creating from your core, and don't shy away from the shadows. Authenticity will attract the right audience. Her response ignited a spark, reinforcing his conviction to embrace the shadows instead of hiding them away. While fear still resonated through him, it felt like a familiar companion rather than a formidable foe. The next morning, Jake woke with a sense of divine purpose. He planned to expand beyond one canvas. Instead, he'd create a series that encapsulated his entire journey, the rawness, the beauty, the pain, and the triumphs. Each piece would tell a chapter, a passage of his exploration through insecurities and beyond. As he mulled over ideas, something ignited anew within him, compelling him to become an architect of his own narrative. His heart racing, he worked through the day, letting his emotions guide every brushstroke. Colors intertwined, creating a dialogue on canvas. As he stepped back, he saw fragments of his tumultuous journey sprawled before him. But as inspiration struck, a darker seed of self-doubt arose. Had he strayed into territory too revealing? Could he truly withstand the reactions that might follow? He paused, anxiously contemplating the forthcoming unveiling of his truth. The doorbell rang, slicing through his solitude. Opening it, he was met with a bold statement. Jake, you need to showcase this. You can't hide this level of truth. It deserves to be seen. It was Emily. Her energy filled the studio, pushing him toward a frightening realization. The moment of truth arrived far quicker than he had anticipated. What would it mean to share his story lithographically? Standing at the threshold of exposure, Jake felt a rush of exhilaration. Would he have the courage to reveal his shadows? Or would fear leverage its hold, pulling him back into the darkness? He was about to find out. Jake found himself caught in a whirlwind, each brushstroke swirling with the anticipation of recognition and the dread of judgment. Emily's presence lingered, illuminating the studio space, but casting long shadows of uncertainty over his resolve. What had felt like an empowering journey just moments ago now bore the weight of external expectations. Showcase it, she had said, but the clarity of her statement was overshadowed by a rush of thoughts. What if sharing his art led to misunderstandings? Would viewers grasp the nuances of vulnerability? The fear of misinterpretation loomed like a storm cloud, threatening to rain on his emerging confidence. He inhaled deeply, inviting the scent of paint to ground him. With newfound determination, he resumed work on the canvases. Vivid layers began to weave themselves into a tapestry of complexities he yearned to express. As colors collided, Jake's chaotic emotions organized into thematic explorations. Titles presented themselves, each encapsulating a truth he grappled with, such as defiance and silenced screams. Jake's mind raced, generating additional concepts, titling this internal conflict as the fear of exposure. Imagining the series left him shaking but invigorated as he pulled out images from his past, moments of triumph and devastation. Each canvas became an archive of his history, revealing the scars and glories that defined him. Within the same breath of creativity, Jake felt a profound sense of responsibility. By unveiling his experiences, he would invite observers into an intimate dialogue, but at what cost? He began to visualize the reactions ahead. Would they offer empathy or retreat into superficial judgments? A knot twisted in his stomach at the thought. The thought of vulnerability being received as vulnerability itself ignited excitement, yet that flame wavered under the shadow of the potential backlash. Hours slid away as fear and creativity danced within him. Each painted layer, though cathartic, was an invitation for critique. Churning emotionally, Jake took a moment. He needed assurance. He reached for his phone again, hesitating as he contemplated asking for feedback, feeling exposed in double measure. Emily, he typed, what if they see my truth but misunderstand it? What if I'm met with ice instead of warmth? Her reply was swift, a beacon of clarity against his inner turmoil. You can't control how others receive your story, but you can control how authentically you share it. Art isn't just your expression, it's a bridge for connection. Vulnerability can redefine the conversation.
Her words crystallized a new perspective. Rather than worrying about how his truth would be interpreted, he needed to focus on the integrity of his expression. Jake's resolve thickened. He returned to the canvas, envisioning not just an exhibition, but a story that could resonate with anyone who felt suppressed or unseen. Through art, he could create a space where unfiltered narratives mingled, and the essence of confronting fear became transformative. Days passed in a blur of activity, with canvases lining the walls, each one pulsating with his struggles. It became clearer that his journey was not one of isolation, but a collective nod to shared experiences of pain and redemption. He stepped back, assessing the lineup of his creations, and an unexpected sense of accomplishment curled within him. Transformation hadn't occurred just in pigments, it resonated through his entire being. But Jake's heart raced still. What would people say when they stepped into that space? Would they merely admire the colors and techniques, or would they see the depth of the stories intertwined?
As he continued to draft, there was a knock at the door again, jolting him from his thoughts. This time it felt different. Anticipation surged into his chest. However, when he opened it, he was met with an empty hallway. A profound silence filled the air. Jake's pulse quickened. Just moments earlier, he was up to his neck in self-exploration, and now a greater existential question tapped at his consciousness. Could he handle the weight of the audience's gaze? With each knock, whether it was an external knock or one of realization, he felt the undeniable push toward decision. In that silence, it became clear. The next brushstroke would not only be painted on canvas, but etched into his very being. Would he be bold enough to turn what lay waiting into something transformative? The fear of exposure lingered, but now, behind that fear, there was something stronger, an undeniable calling to connect through his truth. The day of Jake's exhibition arrived, the air crackling with a mix of exhilaration and anxiety. As he stood in front of the gallery doors, he took a moment to breathe, soaking in the significance of this moment. The culmination of his journey unfolded in vibrant pigments scattered across canvas, each stroke a confession, a symbol of his transformation. Jake realized that this was not merely an exhibition. It was a testament to the authenticity he had fought to reclaim. Inside, the gallery hummed with voices, the energy palpable and tinged with anticipation. As he stepped into the room, a wave of emotion washed over him. Each guest represented the potential for connection, a chance for his truth to resonate with others. He scanned the walls, each piece beckoning with its story, covered by his fears, victories, and vulnerabilities. He felt a wave of pride wash over him as he approached his first canvas, defiance. The bold strokes illustrated his struggle against self-doubt, a visual representation of shouting into a void. As onlookers gathered, their murmurs became a comforting backdrop, each one drawing closer to his journey. "Look at the depth of emotion," he overheard someone whisper. A connection sparked within him, igniting hope that the narrative he sought to convey was breaking through the barriers of misunderstanding. As other visitors engaged with his art, Jake felt a ripple of pride coiling through him. Conversations ignited around each piece, weaving personal interpretations that echoed the raw essence he had poured into every creation. The audience was as diverse as the swaths of color covering his canvases, yet they were united in their shared experience of recognizing vulnerability. Then the unexpected happened. Emily entered the space, her eyes sparkling as she sought him out. The moment he saw her, an unspoken bond of understanding surged forth. She beamed, excitement radiating off her, and when they met, it was as if electricity coursed through them. "You've done it, Dad!"
"This is incredible," she exclaimed, motioning toward his work. Behind her, a small group of her friends squinted at the pieces, curiosity illuminating their faces. The validation buoyed Jake, reaffirming that all the fears he had confronted were dissolving, replaced by an empowering sense of accomplishment. As Emily joined him in discussing the pieces with her friends, he stood back, observing their responses. The laughter and thoughtful dialogue echoed warmly, each conversation weaving deeper connections, transforming doubt into a sense of belonging. "I never knew art could be so real," a classmate of Emily's remarked. "I feel like he's showing me parts of myself I've hidden away."
Their words touched Jake profoundly. They were not merely admiring art, they were engaging in the very dialogues he had hoped to ignite, a share of their vulnerabilities. As the evening progressed, Jake made his way to the centerpiece, a stunning piece he titled Emergence. It encapsulated the essence of his journey, emerging from doubt's suffocating grasp into a newfound vitality. He stood in front of it, and as people circled, their genuine interest ignited something within him, a fierce loyalty to not just his art, but to who he had become. It was then that he spotted the critic from the show. The man approached with a tentative expression, his gaze thoughtful. Jake braced for confrontation, yet instead, the critic spoke with sincerity. "I misjudged your intention," he admitted. "Your work conveys a rawness that is both beautiful and cathartic. You've turned a mirror on yourself, and inadvertently onto all of us. I appreciate that depth." Jake's heart swelled, fueled by a powerful affirmation he had never perceived. The critic's words bridged a gap he thought would remain forever unapproachable, morphing previous judgments into a symphony of recognition. "Thank you," Jake managed, almost choking on his words. "I didn't create these pieces just for admiration. I wanted to share a journey, to be part of something greater." As the night wound to a close, Jake felt lighter, aware that he had emerged from the shadows that had kept him shackled for so long. His fears had transformed, not into chains, but into wings of ascension. Emily found him, her expression filled with admiration. "You are amazing tonight," she said, her sincerity enveloping him in warmth. Every smile, every conversation felt like proof of the power inherent in vulnerability. Jake understood now that he was not defined by his past or his insecurities. Instead, he had become a facilitator of hope, guiding others through their experiences by bravely laying bare his own. The gallery echoed with laughter and conversation filled with understanding, the embodiment of his growth and a legacy of connection. With every stroke of his brush, Jake had not only reclaimed his identity, but forged powerful bonds with those around him. In that moment, he knew he had achieved something monumental.
With resolute conviction, he turned to Emily, embodying the quiet confidence that now filled him. "Are you ready to embark on our next project?" he asked with a smile that reached his eyes. She grinned. Always. Their journey of connection and shared vulnerability had only just begun. Jake stepped out into the night, the city's lights twinkling like stars overhead, reflecting the new path he had chosen, a radiant path paved with authenticity and resilience, grounded in love and creativity. The moment had come. He was ready to embrace not just his own story, but the power of transformation it could create for those still seeking their own. You need to subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. Comment your reactions and theories about the ending. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. This is the moment to show your support and connect with the journey of personal overcoming. Don't wait even one more second to share.